When forgiveness becomes self-betrayal. Let me ask you something. Have you ever forgiven someone, not because they changed, but because you didn't want to carry the weight anymore, only to realize later what you called forgiveness was actually you abandoning yourself? See, forgiveness is powerful, but misused, it becomes poison. It's a virtue, but even virtues, when extended to the wrong people, can be twisted into self-betrayal. There's a hard truth many don't want to admit. Not everyone deserves a second chance. Not every apology deserves your silence. And not every wound should be reopened just to prove you're the bigger person. Stoicism doesn't tell you to numb yourself. It doesn't tell you to become cold or bitter. It tells you to become clear. Clear about who you are. Clear about what you value. And clear about what you will no longer allow. Forgiveness is often marketed as the high road. But what if I told you that in some cases, the higher road is actually walking away? It's not about revenge, it's about self-respect. And real self-respect isn't loud. It's quiet, it's calm, it's decisive. It's you saying, I choose peace, even if it means choosing distance. The Stoics never said to tolerate repeated betrayal. Marcus Aurelius never said, let them hurt you again. What he said was, if someone does wrong, the harm is their own. Do not become like them. Forgiveness is not weakness, but repeated forgiveness without change. That is exhaustion disguised as virtue. It is noble to let go of hate, but it is foolish to hand your peace back to the same people who broke it the first time. This is where we must draw the line, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Because peace is not found in pretending you're unaffected. Peace is found in building boundaries that protect what you've healed. Think about it. How many times have you silenced your truth, smiled through pain, or accepted hollow apologies just to keep the peace? But whose peace was it? Because if you had to betray yourself to keep things calm, that wasn't peace. That was a performance. Forgiveness, when honest, is powerful. But forgiveness that costs you your dignity is too expensive. So here's the real challenge. Can you let go without letting them back in? Can you move forward without carrying the illusion that forgiveness means reconciliation? Because sometimes the most stoic act of all is silence. Not the silence of resentment, but the silence of a person who has made peace with themselves and no longer needs to explain why they left the room. If you've been told you're cold for cutting someone off, if you've been guilt-tripped into being the bigger person, let me remind you. Protecting your energy is not cruelty, it's wisdom. And you owe no one access to the healed version of you if they only knew how to hurt the broken one. So today, let's redefine what it means to forgive. Let's make it less about them and more about you. Your calm, your clarity, your boundaries. Because sometimes the most powerful kind of forgiveness is the kind that comes with distance, and the kind that whispers, I don't hate you. I just love myself more. Let's talk about one of the most underestimated forms of betrayal, disloyalty. It doesn't always come with a knife to the back. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through silence when you needed a voice, through absence when you needed support, through the way someone looked away instead of standing beside you. See, betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it looks like someone watching you drown while pretending they didn't see. And that kind of betrayal, that kind of disloyalty, it's just as devastating as the obvious kind, maybe even more so. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Be tolerant with others, but strict with yourself. And that's noble advice, until you start tolerating behaviors that wound you. Stoicism doesn't mean you become blind to disloyalty. It means you observe it and respond with wisdom. Let me be clear. Loyalty is not just about presence. It's about alignment. It's about knowing someone has your back when your name is no longer trending, when your world is messy, when you've got nothing left to offer except your truth. But when someone chooses convenience over courage, when they choose gossip over defense, when they choose the crowd over the connection they claim to value, that is disloyalty. And no Stoic should let that slide without reflection. Because here's what happens when you keep forgiving disloyalty. You start teaching people that your loyalty is flexible, that your standards are negotiable, that your silence is approval, and it chips away at something even more important than the relationship itself, your self-respect. Loyalty is a sacred currency. It's not about being perfect for each other. It's about being present, honest, and unshakable when it matters most. So when someone shows you that they can't stand with you when the room turns cold, they've already made the choice for you. Your only job now is to believe them. Now I know some of you might be thinking, but what if they're going through something? What if they didn't know how to show up? And sure, empathy matters, but boundaries matter more. Stoicism doesn't tell you to abandon people at their lowest. It tells you to stop abandoning yourself in the name of endless understanding. You are not cruel for expecting loyalty. You are not heartless for requiring consistency. And you are not toxic for walking away when someone proves repeatedly that they don't know how to be solid. Here's the truth. Sometimes, solitude with dignity is far more powerful than connection built on sand. Because when you choose peace over performance, you stop needing others to complete your worth. Imagine this. You're in a storm, and the people you thought would anchor you drift away. What do you do? What do? You stop looking for rescue. You become the anchor, and you remind yourself, I'd rather stand alone in truth than be surrounded in pretense. In a world obsessed with second chances, Stoicism invites you to ask, what did they do with the first one? And if the answer is they broke it, mocked it, or took it for granted, then the most Stoic response is not revenge. It's distance. Calm, intentional, powerful distance. You don't need to shout. You don't need to prove they were wrong. You just step away with quiet strength and let your peace speak louder than their excuses ever could. So if you've been wrestling with the idea of forgiving someone who's been disloyal, ask yourself this. Are you forgiving them to heal, or are you forgiving them so you don't have to face the discomfort of being alone? Because there's a big difference. One leads to growth. The other leads to cycles. Your loyalty is sacred. Your energy is rare. And the next time someone shows you they don't know how to protect it, don't explain, don't convince. Just remember, some betrayals don't deserve closure. They deserve conclusion. Let's talk about deception. Not the kind that's obvious, but the kind that walks in smiling. The kind that dresses itself as love, loyalty, or good intentions, while quietly twisting your reality from the inside out. See, lies aren't always about hiding something. Most of the time, they're about controlling what you see. They're about altering your perception so that someone else gets to shape your truth. And the worst part? It works. At first. You begin to question your own memory, doubt your instincts, replay conversations wondering, was it really that bad? Or am I just overreacting? But you're not overreacting. You're waking up. You're finally seeing that deception isn't just about words, it's about manipulation. Seneca once said, A dishonest man spreads falsehoods first to others, then to himself. That's the danger. People who lie often start believing their own version of events. And once they do, there's no limit to how far they'll go to defend it. They'll minimize the damage. They'll gaslight you. That's not what I said. They'll shift the blame. You made me do it. They'll cry victim when they were the architect of the collapse. But here's what Stoicism teaches us. You don't need to scream to expose a liar. You don't need revenge to reclaim your power. What you need is clarity. What you need is detachment. When someone deceives you, don't engage their illusion. Observe, detach, and watch the pattern, not the apology. Because a lie isn't just a broken fact, it's a broken contract. And once trust shatters, even silence becomes suspicious. Even kindness starts to feel calculated. Every word they say after that, it lands like static, just noise trying to patch over a crack in the foundation. The truth is, trust isn't just about believing what someone says. It's about not needing to question it in the first place. And when that's gone, the relationship becomes a performance. You act like everything's fine. They act like nothing happened. And both of you are just hoping it doesn't fall apart in front of everyone else. But Stoicism isn't about pretending. It's about seeing clearly, even when the truth hurts. It's about choosing peace over performance, reality over comfort, dignity over drama. So if someone lies to you, repeatedly, skillfully, without remorse, you don't owe them your trust. You owe yourself the courage to walk away without guilt. Some people will say, "Come on, everyone lies." And maybe that's true. But there's a difference between a mistake and a method, between a slip of the tongue and a strategy to manipulate. The Stoic path is not about being naive. It's not about excusing deception in the name of harmony. It's about guarding your inner fortress, your mind, your peace, your values, from those who would twist it for their gain. So let me ask you, who in your life speaks with a forked tongue? Who tells you what you want to hear while doing the opposite behind your back? Who always has an excuse, a story, a justification, but never a change? The Stoic response isn't to explode, it's to exit, with calm, with clarity, with conviction. You don't chase down liars and beg them to tell the truth. You simply stop listening. You stop participating in the theater. You stop giving your time, energy, and loyalty to someone who weaponizes your trust. Because here's the thing. The person who lies once breaks a rule. The person who lies twice forms a habit. The person who lies and blames you for noticing, they're telling you who they are. Believe them. And more importantly, believe yourself. In a world where deception can be disguised as charm, choosing to walk in truth is a radical act. It means trusting your gut. It means saying, "This doesn't feel right," even when you can't explain why. It means refusing to play dumb just to keep the peace. So if you've been lied to, again and again, let this be the line. Not because you're bitter, but because you're better than the game. You don't need closure. You don't need confession. What you need is clarity. And a quiet, confident decision that says, "I deserve honesty even when it's hard." And if someone can't offer that, they don't deserve your loyalty, your presence, or your continued patience. The Stoic doesn't cling to false connections. They walk away, not to punish, but to preserve their peace. Disrespect doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It rolls its eyes when you speak. It chuckles at your ideas and calls it just joking. It shrugs when you're vulnerable, then shifts the blame for being too sensitive. And yet, so many of us stay. We explain it away. They didn't mean it. That's just how they are. Or worse, we begin to question ourselves. Am I overreacting? That's the trap. Disrespect rarely shows up all at once. It drips quietly. A sarcastic remark here, a dismissive glance there, an offhand insult masked as humor. And before you know it, you're shrinking. You start emotionally self-editing. You hold back your thoughts. You filter your emotions, not because you've grown stronger, but because you've been conditioned to expect ridicule. But let me be clear, that is not strength. That is survival and stoicism. Stoicism was never about just surviving. It's about living with clarity, dignity, and alignment. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Now think about that. If you surround yourself with people who consistently treat you as less, eventually, you might start believing you are. You might begin internalizing their tone, their dismissiveness, their inability to honor your worth. Not because they're right, but because you've allowed their patterns to paint your inner world. But that ends today. A Stoic is not passive. A Stoic is not weak. A Stoic does not tolerate disrespect in the name of keeping peace. Because disrespect is not just about rudeness. It's about erosion. It erodes self-trust. It chips away at your confidence, and over time it builds a silent prison around your potential. You cannot build a life of purpose while constantly questioning your voice. So ask yourself, who in your life makes you feel small when you try to expand? Who constantly finds a way to undermine your joy, your progress, your presence? Maybe it's not loud. Maybe they never yell. But silence can be just as sharp. Sarcasm can cut deeper than rage. And emotional indifference? It's a message too. Stoicism teaches us not to react emotionally to every offense, yes, but it does not teach us to remain in environments that poison our self-respect. Sometimes walking away isn't about revenge. It's about protection. Protection of your energy, protection of your peace, protection of your mental temple, the mind that builds your future. And here's what you must remember. You don't walk away to teach them a lesson. You walk away to remind yourself that you deserve better. Because the only lesson worth learning is the one you give yourself through action. And action speaks louder than explanations. You don't owe anyone a debate about your boundaries. You don't have to gather evidence for why something feels off. If someone continually disrespects your presence, your dreams, your values, they've already voted themselves out of your circle. Let them go. The world will try to convince you that tolerance is virtue. But Stoicism makes a distinction. Tolerate hardship, not humiliation. Endure pain, not disrespect. Because disrespect is a form of betrayal. Not of the relationship, but of the self, if you allow it to continue. So stand tall in your silence, not out of pride, but out of peace. Your presence is not up for negotiation. Your worth is not a punchline. And your dignity is not a luxury. It is your foundation. From this moment forward, when someone disrespects you, you don't need to fight. You don't need to prove. You simply need to decide. Decide that your inner world is more important than their approval. Decide that discomfort is temporary, but self-betrayal lasts a lifetime. Decide that you are worth the respect you keep giving others. Because at the end of the day, a Stoic doesn't need applause. They just need truth. And the truth is this: disrespect tolerated once becomes permission for it to repeat. Let them wonder why you're distant. Let them question why you stopped responding. Let them feel the absence of the peace they used to distort. You owe no explanation, only elevation. So, ask yourself this one question. If my highest self walked into the room, would they be proud of how I'm being treated today? And if the answer is no, you already know what to do. Let's talk about the kind of betrayal that doesn't make noise. It doesn't scream. It doesn't explode. It simply vanishes when you need someone the most. Abandonment. Not the kind that's written in harsh words or slammed doors, but the kind where people go quiet when you're in pain. The kind where those you thought would stay disappear, not because they couldn't help, but because your struggle made them uncomfortable. And that kind of silence hurts more than words ever could. See, real loyalty doesn't show up when everything's going well. It doesn't reveal itself at the party, or the celebration, or the winning season. Loyalty shows up in the storm. It stands beside you when your world is falling apart, when your name is being questioned, when you're not easy to love, when you're breaking down, not shining. And when someone you trusted turns their back during those moments, it's not just painful, it's revealing. Pain is the great revealer. It shows you who truly stands with you, and who was just there because it was convenient. It shows you who had your back, and who was only around when your energy served them. Now here's the hard truth. Some people don't leave loudly. They leave quietly. They stop calling. They stop checking in. They stop asking how you're really doing. And then they come back later, when it's all over, as if they were there the whole time. But Stoicism teaches us to see clearly, to remove the illusion, to drop the fantasy of what we wish people were, and accept what their actions show us. Seneca once said, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence." Let's sit with that for a moment. What does it mean to live without anxious dependence? It means you no longer base your emotional peace on who stays or who leaves. It means your strength doesn't rely on someone else's presence, but on your own clarity. It means you don't beg for people to stand beside you. You observe who does, and if they don't, you don't chase them. You don't rage at them. You don't try to convince them of your worth. You simply adjust. You remember that the pain of abandonment is not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their capacity. They left because they weren't built for your depth. They fell silent because they couldn't meet your pain with presence. But don't confuse this with Stoic endurance. Yes, Stoicism teaches us to endure hardship. Yes, it calls for inner strength and emotional sovereignty. But it never asks us to suffer in isolation, especially not in the presence of those who should have stayed. You're not weak for desiring support. You're not unstoic for feeling hurt when someone leaves you in crisis. In fact, recognizing that pain, without becoming it, is the mark of a truly trained mind. So here's what you do. You take note. You write it down, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. You document who went silent in your darkest chapter, not to resent them, but to realign your circle, because life is too short to confuse proximity with loyalty. And this is the part most people miss. Betrayal isn't always what they said. It's what they didn't say. The check-in that never came. The silence that screamed louder than any argument. The absence that echoed when your soul needed anchoring. From now on, let the pain become your filter. Let it purify your relationships. Let it reveal what's real, without drama, without begging, without performance. And understand this, you are allowed to grieve the abandonment, but you're not required to carry it. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to explain what they should have done. You simply rise. Quietly, decisively, and build your life in such a way that your peace no longer depends on the presence of unreliable people. That is Stoic power. That is emotional maturity. To say, yes, I was hurt, but I am not broken. Yes, they left, but I never abandoned myself. So if you're watching this, and someone you counted on left when you were hurting, let this be your permission to let them go too. Not with hatred, not with fire, but with understanding and distance. They didn't fail to show up for you. They succeeded in showing you who they really are. And that knowledge, that clarity, that's a gift. Use it. Use it to tighten your boundaries. Use it to choose better next time. Use it to remember. The people who love you will not disappear when things get heavy. They'll stand beside you, quietly, solidly, faithfully. Because some people stand near you when life is good, but only a rare few stand with you when everything falls apart. Choose those people. Release the rest, and in the words of Seneca, enjoy the present, without anxious dependence. Let's be honest. Not every "I'm sorry" means what it sounds like. In fact, some apologies are nothing more than strategies. Not to heal, not to take responsibility, but to regain control. This is what we call false remorse. And if you've lived long enough, you've seen it. The person who hurt you comes back, not because they've changed, but because they hate losing access to you. They miss your attention. They miss the benefits. They miss the version of you that tolerated their chaos. But remorse? Real remorse isn't about getting back in. It's about standing outside the door and saying, I understand why it's closed. Because here's the truth. Real remorse accepts the consequences. False remorse only resents the discomfort. And when someone says sorry, but still expects the same access, the same comfort, the same trust, what they're showing you is not growth. It's entitlement. Seneca said it best. He who spares the guilty punishes the innocent. Think about that. When you overlook clear harm and pretend everything is okay, you're not being noble. You're just shifting the burden from them to yourself. And eventually, to your future. You begin walking on eggshells, second-guessing your instincts. And worst of all, you start apologizing for having standards. But a Stoic doesn't do that. A Stoic sees beyond the words. They look at patterns. They ask, does this person's behavior align with their apology? Not just once, not just in a desperate moment of reconciliation, but consistently. Because Stoicism isn't about being cold, it's about being clear. And clarity says, if someone hurts you and refuses to change, you have a duty to your own peace to close that door. Not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Let me give you an example. Say someone lies to you repeatedly. Then one day they cry and say they're sorry. They say they'll never do it again. But the next time things get difficult, they lie again. That's not remorse, that's repetition. And if you keep forgiving without consequence, you become their emotional reset button, not their reason to grow. Forgiveness without change is not compassion. It's complicity. And let's be clear, forgiveness doesn't always require reconnection. You can release resentment without re-inviting the same pattern into your life. You can be peaceful without being permissive. You can move on without opening the same door that let the pain in. So what's the Stoic move here? Simple. Look at the evidence. Don't get swayed by emotion. Don't get caught in sweet words or symbolic gestures. Watch for effort. Watch for consistency. Watch for change when no one's watching. Because anyone can say the right thing, but only those truly sorry will do the hard thing. They'll own it. They'll face discomfort. They won't rush your healing or beg for shortcuts. They'll step back, and if they care, they'll do the work. And if they don't, you let them go. You let the door stay closed. Not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself enough to stop welcoming the same storm. So here's the takeaway. You're not a bad person for not accepting every apology. You're not cold for saying, your words don't match your pattern. You're not unforgiving for requiring proof, not promises. You're wise. You're awake. You've chosen clarity over chaos. And that is Stoic living. We don't live in fantasy. We live in truth. And the truth is, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. So if you're facing false remorse right now, ask yourself, does their apology come with real accountability? Are they making sacrifices or just statements? Are they consistent or just convenient? And most importantly, are you betraying yourself in order to forgive them? If the answer is yes, you already know what needs to be done. Remember, compassion is not the same as access. You can wish someone healing and still walk away, because peace is not found in repeating what hurt you. It's found in protecting what you've rebuilt. So the next time someone shows up with, "I'm sorry," don't just listen to the words. Listen to the pattern. Listen to the silence between their actions. And listen to the version of you that's finally done performing for peace. So let me ask you something. What's more important, being seen as forgiving or living in peace? Because forgiveness isn't the highest virtue when it comes at the cost of clarity. Forgiveness isn't noble when it becomes a mask for avoidance. And forgiveness isn't powerful when it requires you to shrink, just to make others feel comfortable. Let's make this clear. Forgiveness is not weakness. But it's not always the solution either. Sometimes, the Stoic path isn't about opening your heart again. It's about closing the door, softly, firmly, and permanently. You don't need to burn bridges, but you also don't need to keep building them, especially for people who only show up to cross, exploit, and leave you standing in the ash. Marcus Aurelius said, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been." That's the foundation of Stoic peace. You choose what enters your soul. Not every betrayal has to become your burden. Not every apology has to earn back access. And not every history deserves a future. Let's go deeper. Forgiveness, when rooted in clarity, says, "I release you from my resentment. I release myself from the story. But I also release the fantasy that things will ever be the same." Because some relationships aren't broken. They're finished. You can outgrow people with grace. You can detach without rage. You can walk away without slamming the door. That's not coldness. That's wisdom. Stoicism is not about suppressing emotions. It's about mastering them. It's about knowing when to stay, and when staying is actually a slow form of self-betrayal. Here's a truth you might need to hear today. You don't owe anyone your peace. Not because you're unforgiving, but because you've outgrown the version of yourself that tolerated pain just to keep the illusion of connection alive. You've learned, you've endured, and now it's time to evolve. Some people will call you cold when you no longer respond to their chaos. Let them. Some will call you bitter when you set boundaries. Let them. Some will call you unforgiving when you choose your mental health over reconciliation. Let them. Their opinions don't pay your peace. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to be at peace with yourself. That is what the Stoic life is built upon. Not passive acceptance, not endless tolerance, but intentional clarity. So let's summarize what true peace requires. Detach without drama. You don't need explosions to exit. You need discipline to walk away in silence. Respect yourself enough to walk away. Not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself enough not to stay. Don't negotiate with betrayal. Someone who has broken your trust more than once has already answered the question you keep asking. You are not unkind for choosing peace. You are not cruel for cutting off chaos. You are not selfish for saying, "This no longer serves who I'm becoming." Here's the truth. You've bled for people who wouldn't bring you a bandage. You've dimmed your light just to make someone else comfortable in their shadow. You've watered dead gardens because you mistook loyalty for purpose. That chapter ends today. Forgiveness may still happen. But reconnection? That requires proof, not just promises. If someone can't meet you with honesty, effort, and respect, then forgiveness without distance is just another form of submission. Your healing cannot depend on someone else's remorse. Your dignity cannot be tied to their behavior. And your future cannot be a repetition of the same lesson, just because you were afraid to walk away. So walk. Walk away with your dignity intact. Walk with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer performs for peace. Walk with the power of knowing that leaving isn't weakness. It's wisdom in action. And if you ever question your strength, remember this. Some people stay in toxic patterns for years. You chose to stop, to grow, to reclaim your inner stillness. And that is the most stoic thing you can do. So here's the final message I leave you with today. You don't control how others treat you, but you do control what you allow. You don't control their patterns, but you do control what you tolerate. You don't control whether someone values your worth, but you do control whether you stay where it isn't recognized. And that is more than enough. If this message spoke to something deep in you, something tired of tolerating, something ready to rise, then don't just scroll past this moment. Subscribe now, not for motivation, but for mental armor. Every week, we dive deeper into the mindset that frees you, that grounds you, that reminds you, peace isn't found, it's built. One boundary, one breath, one bold step at a time. This is your next step.